I'm an archaeologist and a gamer, and I just finished Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, so I wanted to give you guys my take on what the game does well and what I think it gets wrong. I do want to preface this by saying that Indiana Jones is the reason I became an archaeologist, and I absolutely adore this series, but I'm going to do my absolute best to give an unbiased take on the game. So Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is hands down the best indie story since The Last Crusade's release in 1989, and it's not even close. The Great Circle does a brilliant job of hitting all the beats you would expect in an indie movie, including the genuinely funny, the wildly absurd, and the locations and sets that leave your jaw on the floor. The opening of the game is just magical. If you've seen the Raiders of the Lost Ark, you are in for an absolute treat, as the first 30 minutes is a faithful recreation of the movie's golden idol boulder dodging scene that skyrocketed the series to stardom in 1971. Except in this version, Indy doesn't escape the boulder and he gets crushed to death. Except this was all in a dream and he awakes to find himself in his office back at the university. The thing is though, all is not right, and after hearing a disturbance, he goes to investigate and finds that someone's broken into the university and stolen a cat mummy that he recently recovered from Siwa in Egypt. Luckily for Indy, as the perpetrator fled the scene, they dropped an amulet, and that leads them to the Vatican, which is the first major area of the game. This is where you get to start exploring the game's systems, including the stealth, combat, piecing together puzzles, using the map and Indy's notebook, meeting some of the major story characters, and learning how to fight. And fighting in the Great Circle is both incredibly satisfying and at times very frustrating. Before I played, I was super skeptical about the first-person view, but I can tell you with full confidence that first person was the right choice. The hand-to-hand combat is genuinely challenging, and you'll need to block, dodge, and throw punches at the right time to exploit your opponent's defensive gaps. Likewise, using melee weapons is extremely satisfying, especially because you can use just about anything in the game, including brooms, fly swatters, chisels, and even sledgehammers for extra brutal kills. This goes doubly for stealth kills, which allow you to instantly take down an enemy. I don't think I've had as much fun bonking people on the head in any other game, honestly. It is just so satisfying to crush a Nazi's head with a sledgehammer. However, guns in the Great Circle, while they feel great to shoot, they just feel completely useless compared to the melee. More often than not, an enemy will take 8 to 10 body shots or 4 to 5 headshots to go down with any of the guns in the game except the shotgun, which takes them down in 2. I think the devs did this to incentivize the use of stealth and melee attacks, but there are a few times throughout the game where the only option is to use guns, and these times feel overly difficult and a bit clunky because of the lack of damage. Unfortunately, the first area of the game, the Vatican, is also the worst area in the game. I found it quite tedious to navigate with its multi-level areas, tight stairways that often lead to nowhere, myriad of locked doors and dead ends, and worst of all, the guards. Now, of course, it makes sense that the Vatican would be this way and that there would be a ton of guards around, but oh my god, does it make learning the game's stealth and combat systems difficult in the beginning when every single move you make causes the guards to become alerted, forcing you to die and reset your save. It also doesn't help that this is the only part of the game where the story falls a little flat as well, and I think this is a huge problem for the game because some people will find that the story just isn't interesting enough in this portion to keep them going through the tedium of the Vatican. I even watched a few other players on Twitch go through this tedium as well, where they struggled to deal with the guards, they would alert them all and they couldn't get away from them and they would just die and reset their save. Luckily though, I quickly learned that stealth is king in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and the game suddenly became a lot more enjoyable, and the story quickly picked up and sucked me into the point that I felt like I'd been playing for just 2 or 3 hours, when in reality, the sun was starting to come up outside and more than 12 hours had passed. I really hope that if you do play, you'll give the game the chance it deserves, because once you get past this initial Vatican slump, the game picks up in an incredible way. After you leave the Vatican, you make your way to Egypt in an area around the Giza Plateau where the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx are located. It's here that the game begins to truly shine and become one of the best gaming experiences I've had in recent memory. The open nature of the area allows the player to properly plan and execute stealth attacks using disguises, distractions, and plain old sneaking around in an incredibly satisfying and effective way, but it never forces you into a particular playstyle. Here we also become properly acquainted with the main villain of the game, and this is where you really start to notice that the voice acting in the Great Circle is absolutely S tier. I actually noticed this straight away when it came to Troy Baker voicing Indiana Jones, because there were times throughout the game where you would swear it really was Harrison Ford, but here in Egypt is where you start to really get to know the other characters, and that's where their voice actors really bring them to life. Honestly, I haven't really cared about characters in a video game like this in such a long time, and even though I finished the main story of the game, I'm excited to go back and do their side quests to learn more about them. For example, Gina, who's one of the main characters and accompanies Indy on his adventures, is portrayed by Alessandra Mastronardi and is a genuinely surprising character throughout the game who started out a bit annoying at first, but I had grown to really like her by the end of the game. Marius Gavrilis also does a phenomenal job at voicing the main villain, Emmerich Voss. Voss is a complicated character character who is both an awful person on account of, being a Nazi, but is also brilliant, intriguing, knowledgeable about the human psyche and archaeology, and comes across as calm and collected for the most part, but becomes an unhinged lunatic at the drop of a hat. Voss might actually be my favorite character in the game on account of just how well Gavriel has nailed this complex portrayal. I also want to give a special shout out to Todd, who plays Locus, the villain who breaks into the university at the start of the game. Tony's a brilliant actor and he had an incredible career. I personally first saw him as a badass Marine in The Rock, but long before that, he was scaring the absolute pants off the world as the Candyman, or for some of the young viewers, Venom in Spider-Man 2. Tony unfortunately passed away on the 6th of November this year, but if you play the game, he gets a pretty amazing farewell, so rest in peace, Tony. Another interesting point that my community picked up on Twitch was that there's some variation in the accuracy of the dialogue. For example, one Egyptian Arabic speaking viewer said that the accent and lingo for the Egyptian workers was absolutely perfect, while another German speaking viewer said that the German spoken by the Nazis was a little more modern than what they believe the Nazis would have used. This video is already longer than I intended. I'll also be diving into the history and archaeology of the locations of the game in further detail in another video, so I'm just going to go through and give you guys a few additional points about the pros and cons of the game. So first of all, the Nazi uniforms are accurate and well portrayed, and the game doesn't shy away from depicting Nazi symbolism, including the salute. Often games skirt around this by using the Iron Cross in place of the swastika, and they have Nazi soldiers do a regular military salute. But I really appreciate the historical accuracy used here, and I think it's important that we don't shy away from this confronting imagery because it lets people forget just how horrific this time period was. Some of the proportions for things in the game are completely off. For example, I've been to the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican, and it is way smaller in the game than it is in real life. It's just a very weird thing. I don't know why they've done this. I've also been to the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids at Giza, and trust me when I say that the real life versions are several orders of magnitude larger than what you will see in the game. I'm not too sure why the devs did this. Maybe I'm assuming it cut down dev time and costs to make them smaller, but it's just very weird to stand next to the Sphinx and it's kind of tiny. The graphics are gorgeous and they're realistic, but somewhat stylized in a really beautiful way. The game's also incredibly well optimized, which if you're a PC gamer is especially surprising given the slop we've been served up by other games recently. Unfortunately, unless you have a 20 series or newer graphics card though, you flat out can't play the game, which excludes a huge number of people and feels like a pretty crappy thing to do. If you have got it running on a 10 series or lower card, please let me know in the comments. As far as I can tell, the hieroglyphs in Egypt were also actually pretty accurate. I'm not an Egyptologist, I'm just an archaeologist, but I was able to read one of the cartouches showing Khufu's name, which was pretty cool, and it makes sense given the location that I read it in. There are also accurately depicted artifacts in several museum locations that have little display cards, just like a real life museum, that tell you what the artifact is, where it came from, and its significance, which is a really, really nice touch. But the most incredible attention to detail in the game, in my opinion, is the presence of section drawings in an archaeological dig tent. Shut the fuck up. This is actually amazing. Hold this hammer. These are fucking actual, like, legitimate. That's a stratigraphy drawing. That's like a legitimate stratigraphy drawing from like an archaeological dig. Like, look at this one. Hey, I'm doing something here. Anyway, yeah, look at this one. So a section drawing is something that we actually use in real life even to this day. They help us to depict and understand how the layers of sediment being excavated have formed through time, including things like holes that were dug by humans for things like post holes or burials. And it's something that I've personally done many, many times at work as an archaeologist. To see them here in the game, in the right place, like in an archaeological dig tent, and actually be accurate, like well drawn, is an attention to detail that the devs really did not need to go to, and it just highlights that this game really was a passion project. These developers really loved this game, and they loved the world they created. And honestly, I just take my hat off to them because it is unbelievably well done. There's been a lot of noise about DEI with Indiana Jones, and honestly, I don't really know where this comes from. There's been some accusations about LGBTQ stuff being forced into the game. I don't really know where this is coming from, honestly. The game's not a woke fest or whatever people are labeling it. It's just a brilliant, fun game. I can't imagine calling a game that's full of Nazis and Hail Hitlers and Nazi salutes a woke game. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you enjoyed Indiana Jones. I'll be making more videos about this because obviously I love the game. I am biased to it. It's probably my favorite game of the year. But if you enjoyed the video, please hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate you guys, and I'll see you on the next video.